Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah amma ba'd. And welcome to the IFG Tafseer session 12. Alhamdulillah. Muhsin, assalamu alaikum. How's things?
Wa alaikum salam. Very well. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. Not bad. I'm quite excited about today's tafsir. So I think that the plan, inshallah, is that we're going to talk about three things. Firstly, we're going to talk about fear and how it's, generally speaking, seen as quite a negative emotion, and actually it can be seen as quite a positive thing and quite a healthy thing. And the verse we're going to talk about, I think it talks about fear, specifically taqwa, in quite a positive way. And then the second and third thing we want to talk about is the Islamic way that you can really incorporate willpower and increase the willpower in your life. And then finally, this whole new trend of minimalism is actually very much a prophetic tradition. So inshallah, without any further ado, I'll dive in, and Mohsin, as ever, feel free to chip in as and when you'd like. And just actually before I dive in, for people who are tuning in to this for the first time, this is a business and ethics and finance focused tafsir. And what we do is we go through some key verses in the Quran on these topics, and we do a tafsir both from a spiritual side, but then also from a very commercial and practical and real life perspective as well. So let's start then. So the verse that we're going to be talking about today is the 197th verse of Surah Baqarah, and it goes, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم الحج أشهر معلومات فمن فرض فيهن الحج فلا رفث ولا فسوق ولا جدال في الحج وما تفعلوا من خير يعلمه الله وتزودوا فإن خير الزاد التقوى واتقون يا أولي الألباب. So the translation is, Hajj is during well-known months. So whoever has made Hajj obligatory upon himself, therein by entering the state of Ihram, for example, there is to be for him no sexual relations and no disobedience and no disputing during Hajj. And whatever good you do, Allah knows it. And take provisions, but indeed the best provisions is the fear of Allah. And fear me, Allah says, O you of understanding. And so it's this last verse, the last section of that verse, that we're going to be particularly focusing on today. And that is, and take provisions. وَتَزَوَّدُوا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ordering the people who are going on Hajj, but also it's a more general principle here as well. وَتَزَوَّدُوا. Take provisions. Prepare yourself for whatever journey you're going on economically and in terms of how you're going to get on. But indeed, the best provision that you can take, the very best stuff that you can take for an arduous journey, for an arduous quest, is the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we want to really explore that and understand what that's all about. So the first thing is that actually fear is something that we think is not a good thing, right? When we think fear, I don't know about you, Mohsin, but I always think horror movies and like that kind of sinister music that you hear, and then more practically, I suppose, there's almost a fear that runs through all of our daily lives, right? It's something that we see as quite a negative thing. So sorry, say that again.
Like Monday morning.
Exactly, I know it's a very fearful thing, that Monday mornings, apart from to this Monday, which is going to be a bank holiday, one of the few great things that the banks have given us, alhamdulillah. So fear is something that I think impels us to do so much in our life, right? It's the thing that lubricates and gets the world going round. And what do I mean by that? Well, think about the child who does his homework. In part, that's because of fear. Think about that spouse who buys their spouse a present if they know they've done something slightly wrong. There's an element of fear there, right? Think about, when you're at work and you're given some work to do. Why do you do that? At least in part, there's a fear of the consequence of not doing that work. And so, and fear in marketplaces, Mohsin, I mean, greed and fear is the thing that makes the markets move, right? That's the thing that sets demand and supply and, the things that go up and down. So
I've got quite a funny story on this, actually. That's just from so when I was doing my GCSEs, we got this new English teacher, and he kind of twigged quite early on that the quickest way to motivate me was to make me fearful. And he marked my first essay that I did for him, and I remember very vividly him coming up to me in the next lesson and saying, "Mohsin, if you want a D in your English exam, then carry on writing like this." And I maintain to this day that he is the only man that has got 100% out of me.
Allahu Akbar. I'll remember that. I'll remember that, inshallah. If I ever need to motivate you, then I'll remind you of the D's.
Exactly.
So look, and actually, I've had similar experiences myself. Like, I during my long journey of learning the Quran, we studied with a whole bunch of different scholars and huffaz who teach us, and there's really human nature boils down to a few key ingredients, and that's you've got either the carrot or you've got the stick, or you've got a genuine passion for the subject or whatever, and I suppose that's part of the carrot, right? Either you really enjoy it or you're stimulated by it, or you see like a reward at the end of it, or you see a negative outcome if you don't do it. And I experienced that whole gamut during my hifth. So I went to a traditional Maulana back in the day who used to do your classic slippers, beating up kids, whatever, and that was very much fear. And then we went the other end of the spectrum where you'd get incentivized in various different ways to do stuff by the more kind of younger teachers, and that had a different effect. So I suppose bringing it all together, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he's talking about fear, and he says, "Wattaquni ya ulil albab," fear me, or you who reflect, or you who have reflection and lub, and you have wisdom and you have understanding. Fear me. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that, he gets that is the thing that's going to motivate us as human beings. That is the thing that's going to actually get the best out of us. I mean, if you think about it, right, we've got this universe has been created, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created it with our best interests at heart. He knows what's good for us, and he's communicated that to us in the Quran. And he's laid out for us that this is the best way that you should live your life, both for this life, but certainly for the hereafter. And there's that journey that we go on, right? We go on this journey of self-development, and we as human beings, we need to forego the short term for the long-term benefit. We need to forget about our instant gratification, our desires, and we need to look at the long term. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he knows that the best way that I can get these human beings, because I've created them, to do this, is by a degree of fear and by a degree of greed, or the carrot or the stick. And so Allah, and the Quran, Mohsen, when you read this, the Quran is just full of carrots and full of sticks. Every so often, pretty much every verse of every page that you read, there will be some form of carrot and some form of stick. And I think that's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he completely gets, well, of course he does, because he's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's our creator. He completely gets how we as human beings tick.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, really, because I was doing some reading on this beforehand, and there is this whole concept of the fear of loss is greater than the desire to win, and there are numerous studies kind of backing this up. I'm sure the audience can go away and have a look. But quite a simple example is, if I give you, a 95% chance of winning 10 grand from me, or I just say there's 100% of you taking 9,400, you're pretty much always going to take the 9,400, I would say. And that really epitomizes and symbolizes that idea of the fear of loss being greater. And if you think about it, you talked before about fear making the world go round. There are whole industries actually that rely on fear. So look at insurance, for example, leaving aside the Islamic discussion on insurance, but think about what is the emotion that customers go through when they buy insurance. You know, okay, you've got to buy car insurance from a legal perspective, but your optional insurance, what is the driver behind that? And it is undoubtedly fear.
Agreed. And I suppose yeah, I mean, I completely agree. There was I saw an advert on life insurance, I think, and that was quite a powerful advert. And I almost thought that was like pushing the line a bit. And it was a legal and general advert, which I didn't necessarily associate with pushing the letter on this. And it was basically saying that, if you die, what's going to happen to your kids, essentially, and the whole point of it was that you should look into life insurance and cover your back.
Yeah, and the marketing guys have obviously got this down to a T. So you'll hear, for example, even more simple things like, I don't know, double glazing or whatever. They won't say save £100. They'll be like, stop losing £100 every year. And that small tweak in the language is designed to drive at this whole idea of fear.
Makes sense, yeah. And it's really is fascinating. I think it's one of the miracles of the Quran, how in tune it is with our psyche and getting the best out of us. I mean, Ghazali has a fantastic little quote on this. He says that the fear of Allah, and this is bringing into action that point I was making about how taqwa and the fear of Allah helps us develop as human beings and helps us reach that self-actualization or that end point that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to reach and we aspire to reach. Fear gets us there. So Ghazali says, fear of Allah rips away desires and muddens luxuries so that cherished sins become reprehensible. Just as a honey lover, someone who likes honey, is repelled by it when he learns that it has poison in it. This is how fear burns desires, disciplines the organs, subordinates the heart and gives it tranquility. But it also enables the heart to rid itself of pride, hatred and envy, and it leaves it absorbed in fear. And hence the heart becomes preoccupied with its own worries and looks towards its best interest in the long run. It is then engaged in only matters like meditation, self-analysis and struggle. It cherishes its time and its moments. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gets what makes us tick, and He takes us to that next level. So that's kind of one of the spiritual downloads from this verse that I got. And the second kind of spiritual download, if you want to call it that, is that let's think about taqwa for a moment. What is taqwa? It comes from the root word wikaya, which is the idea of the shield. And what are you shielding from with this taqwa? Well, this fear of Allah, this taqwa, is protecting you from sinning. And actually, let's go back to the verse. The verse says, وَتَزَوَّدُوا فَإِنَّ خَيْرَ الزَّادِ التَّقْوَى, and seek provisions, but indeed know that the best of provisions is taqwa. And interestingly, there is a hadith that says that sinning leads to the end of provision. Sinning actually decreases one's provision. And so when we have taqwa and we avoid sinning, the net result of that is actually that we increase our provision, and certainly we don't decrease our provision. And so actually this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a backhanded way saying that you should fear me and you should have taqwa in me, and I will sort out everything else. There's actually a really good verse, I believe I want to say Surah Hashr, I might be wrong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. And in that verse as well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He links rizq with taqwa. وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. Whoever has fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will set for him a way out. وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبْ. And He will give him rizq and sustenance from where he did not even imagine it coming. I mean, how many times Does that happen to you and I, Mohsin, where, if we do that one good thing at some point, and it's hard to do, but then because we've done it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will give us rizq from somewhere completely unexpected. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fascinating that He's linking it here, but also in that verse as well. This whole idea that have taqwa, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you that rizq that you need, that you're after.
Yeah, 100%, Ibrahim. And I've got this funny vision of you writing, these elaborate books that you get nowadays, or like some really elaborate LinkedIn post on how to become a millionaire. And the answer actually is just stop sinning and do good deeds.
Yeah.
And it reminds me actually of that, that story with Imam Shafi'i. Well, it's not a story; it's a poem, isn't it? Where he talks about his memory kind of going and stuff like that, and you'll be able to discuss it in much more better terms than I will. But the root problem there again was sinning, wasn't it?
Right, exactly. So the verses, the verses are. There's lots of versions of this particular verse that I've heard. But شكوت إلى وكيع عن سوء حفظي. I complained to my teacher Waqi' about the ailment of my hifth. My hifth had decreased. فأرشدني عن ترك المعاصي فقال إن العلم نورا ونور الله لا يهدى لعاصي. He said he guided me to leaving sinning, and he said because the ilm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is light, it's nur, and the nur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it does not come to the one who is a sinner. And frankly, I found this in my experience as well, and I don't know about you, Mohsin, but I find that when your iman is at a high level, that you are performing better, and when you're pushing yourself, and when your willpower, and I suppose this brings me nicely onto the next point about how willpower is a muscle, and as a Muslim, as a strong Muslim, when you're firing on all cylinders, when you're doing fajr, you're doing it on time, you're doing it in the masjid, you're waking up, you might even be doing tahajjud, you're lowering your gaze, you're giving charity, just everything is going really, really smoothly. And that sometimes we hit that kind of purple patch where everything's clicking, and when that is happening, I find that things around me become a lot easier. So as a kid, when I was in that immersive kind of environment where I was doing hifth of the Quran for hours every day, I mean, I've not read that much Quran since, unfortunately, but when you're learning the Quran by heart, you're completely immersed in it, and at that point I found everything else around me, my studies and whatever I was doing, I found that really easy, and it just all kind of made sense, and it clicked, and it was straightforward. And I found that as my kind of time spent with the Quran, unfortunately, naturally, it will go down, and I wish it didn't. But as it has gone down, I find that my overall performance, the strength of my willpower, the strength of my hifz, all of that suffers as a result. And it's a really fascinating, but very you wouldn't think it of from just the scientific perspective, but it's genuinely what I've experienced. I don't know about yourself, if you've experienced something similar.
Yeah, no, absolutely have. And even the other point with me is that what I found is that when you're going through the purple patches you've described it, it's not just that everything else falls into place, it's that everything else sort of seems it has the significance that it should, i.e., everything's in proportion. Whereas otherwise, and me and you are up to lots of various different things, and we're busy doing this, that, the other, and we've got families and all that. It's very easy to be overwhelmed and lost in all the different things that you're doing. And
Right.
frankly, it's probably a failure and a weakness on my part, because all of that is not anchored by being in that purple patch. And that's partly why I'm really looking forward to Ramadan, because these moments that Allah gives us, surely some of the hikmah of that is exactly for these kind of reset button situations where you kind of rein yourself back in and you're forced to do these things because if there's one time in the year that you should make an extra special effort, it is of course Ramadan, and you hope that that is then the momentum and the impetus for you to go on and achieve better things. Much in the same way, for example, that you know Liverpool or Man City or whoever it is right now, they'll go off on their summer holidays soon. But then just before the season, they'll have their really rigorous pre-season training camp in the United States or whatever it is. And we as Muslims should look at these opportunities much in the same way and treat them in a way like athletes do.
Agreed. And I I say this to myself first. I feel like we don't take enough benefit from Ramadan. It just comes and then it goes, and I speak certainly as a professional working life, working in the city. It's busy, and it's very easy to let Ramadan just kind of pass by, and I think we should take inspiration from those people in our community who really focus on Ramadan and get the absolute maximum they can out of it, because this whole idea, willpower, coming back to the whole point of willpower, is a muscle, and the more you exercise it, the more you get good at putting your long-term benefits before your short-term desires, the better you will be at life, full stop. Like, there are a bunch of psychological studies that show that kids who had that ability to forego their immediate impulses and to put their long-term benefit before everything else were actually, when they grew up as adults, far more successful than the kids who gave into their short-term impulses. And so this ability to control your willpower and to develop that muscle is not only absolutely crucial for our akhirah, but actually in this dunya as well, quite frankly. I think it will have massive benefits as well. And our religion is such that it designs us so that we're constantly having to exercise our willpower, because actually that's the ingredient that gets us to achieve the best form of ourselves. When you're having to, every day we're forced to get up for Fajr. Every day we're forced to, pray consistently during the day. Every day we're forced to eat only halal. We're forced to lower our gaze. We're forced to not talk with members of the opposite gender in a flirtatious way, or X, Y, and Z. There's a whole bunch of things all around us where we're constantly having to exercise our willpower. And I think a lot of us, we don't necessarily do it consciously, but I want us to do it consciously, because this is actually the very journey that's going to get us to where we want ourselves to be ultimately. So I suppose one other thing to add to this whole discussion about willpower and fear and all this stuff is that this is very much an emotional thing as well with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you fear someone, so far we've kind of to some extent made it out as quite a transactional thing, in a way where you can benefit from that fear or you can benefit from that willpower. But let's have a think about a hadith. There's a hadith where Rasulullah, he says that if through fear of Allah, tears, even to the extent of a fly's head, fall from any believer's eyes and drop on some part of his cheek, he will be kept away from hell by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's in Ibn Majah. So this hadith is talking about someone who fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the extent that he cries. So what's this all about? And this is something that's so precious in of itself, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that I'm going to take this person out of hellfire as a result of this. So what's going on there? Well, I was reflecting on this, and I'd be interested in, Mohsin, if you've got any other thoughts on this, but I was thinking that it comes back down to an emotional connection here, right? This is very much an emotional thing, where you have a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He's your creator. He gave you everything. He gave you all of these organs, and yet you have used these same gifts that He has given you, and you have used that for ill. You have used that for sin, and then you think that on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make these things speak. I can't remember the exact ayah, but He will make the hands and the feet speak, and they will testify against you, and the tongue, it will speak out against ourselves and for the things that we've done. And that's really because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave it to us and we've abused it. And so there's that guilt there. There's that betrayal almost, or there's a element of shame there. And I think that is getting us moving very much in the right direction. And
that reminds me of I can't remember where. I think it's somewhere in the 30th juz, and you'll probably know this, but one of the surahs, Allah asks mankind, "Ma gharraka bi rabbika al-kareem," which is such an incredible way of just putting those feelings straight back into our hearts. Those feelings that you mentioned about guilt and so on and so forth. Like, Allah addresses that so beautifully, and we are frankly neglectful of Allah, and why is that?
Agreed. I'm trying to find the actual verse. It's such a powerful verse. Let's continue on actually. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he wants this emotional connection as well to be part of our understanding of taqwa and fearing him. So let's move on now and talk about how this whole thing applies to the 21st century man. So we've done the spiritual download section. We want to now talk about this 21st century man. And in this verse, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَتَزَوَّدُوا فَإِنَّ خَيْرَ الزَّادِ التَّقْوَى, and seek provision, and verily the best provision that you can actually seek is taqwa, there is inherent within this a teaching of minimalism. There's inherent within this understanding that we shouldn't splurge out and just buy objects and goods and assets and whatever and stock up and have loads and loads of provisions in order to meet with all eventualities. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, don't do that. Obviously do the basics, but then actually the best taqwa is to have the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that'll get you far. And I was reflecting on this whole trend that we've seen of minimalism that's come about, this movement away from clutter. And at heart, I think it's a movement away from an attachment to objects and things and items and stuff that just fills our house. And I think it's not just objects, but it's also a minimalist approach to everything. And this is very much a prophetic way. I mean, Rasulullah, examples of the kind of minimalism that he had. He, of course, would only eat 1/3 of his fill. Like, his stomach would always be 1/3 empty, and 1/3 would be water, and 1/3 would be the actual food. So that's minimalism in food. And I think that's completely passed us by in an age of gluttony. He used to have 3 thobes, and he would rotate between them. And sometimes he would, run out of thobes where, they were, if one was dirty and the other one became dirty, then he would have to wait until they dried in order to have enough clothes to wear. His furniture in his household, he had a mattress of palm fiber, he had some bowls and some crockery, and he had armor, and that was basically it. I mean, there's a famous hadith about how Aisha radiallahu anha, she got these cushions, and they had pictures of, I think, birds on them, and there's that whole discussion about images and in the household and stuff, and there's this hadith comes into play for that. But the thing that I took away from that, one of the things, was that having new cushions in the household was a massive deal for the Prophet, because if you've only got a handful of pieces of furniture, then having cushions, and then to say that you should get rid of these cushions is a pretty big indication of how little you have in your material goods. And then Prophet ﷺ, he was minimalist in his speech as well. So he said that I've been favoured over other prophets in 6 different ways, and one of the ways was that I've been given jawami'ul kalim, I've been given the gift of concise speech. And Mohsin, as you know, you and I as lawyers and people who have to spend time editing our videos and audio, we know very well that we don't have that gift of concise speech. But actually,
I was just going to say actually that is such a fascinating statement of the Prophet ﷺ, because when you're growing up and going through GCSEs and all this stuff, we are taught in schools, or certainly I was taught in schools, or you're encouraged in order to hit the right marks in the exam to use lots of different words and quite flowery language and stuff like that. As you get older, and certainly in our profession, what clients really value, and the kind of the really good training that me and you have had, is really all about getting your drafting down into really quite concise, clear language. And actually, when you're talking to clients, and even simple things like emails, just get the point across quickly, and don't beat around the bush and all that sort of stuff. And that is exactly what it seems to me, exactly what the Prophet ﷺ was gifted with, that concise speech. And it's so important, frankly, as a skill for any Muslim out there, any person out there, because there's nothing more frustrating than hearing people like me and you going on for ages.
agreed, agreed. And I think that with this minimalism stuff, there's so much benefit that we can get from it, just generally as well. So there's this whole idea of zuhud in Islam, this asceticism, and having a very, very simple approach to life. And I think that throughout our tradition, there was a real celebration of this whole approach. And I think one of the big benefits that we get from minimalism is that it makes us see things in the right perspective. It gets our dunya and akhirah priorities completely in the right order. It gets us to think about the akhirah as opposed to the material dunya, the things that will not last. وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى. The akhirah is better and everlasting. And there's some very interesting different quotations that I found. Al-Mustawrid al-Fihri, he related that the Prophet ﷺ said that the dunya as compared to the akhirah is just like when one of you dips his finger in the sea. Let him see how much water his finger will carry. Like if you take out that finger from the sea, massive sea, and the water that is on it, the dunya, this thing that we so strive for, I mean, it just boggles the mind. This dunya is compared to the droplets on that finger, and then the akhirah is the rest of the water in that ocean. It just boggles the mind. And I think our priorities, when we listen to a hadith like that, they need to change. And then there's another hadith, how Prophet ﷺ, he said that nothing fills the son of Adam except dust. So nothing really will fulfill or satiate a human being until death. That's what he's indicating. Like when that mouth is filled with dirt as he's buried, that's the only thing that will satiate him. And I think that's very true. I mean, you and I, we've experienced this in our life, that as you grow older, you become more prosperous, you do have more financial success, but that's never ever enough. And there's always someone more, there's always something more to do. And I'm sure that even billionaires, when they have 1 billion, they look to get 50 billion, and they'll feel that they're poor relative to who they're comparing themselves to. And so this whole minimalist thinking is actually something that I think is very, very prophetic, in that it kind of takes us back to our base and realigns what our priorities really should be. So the next section is the story of the verse. Mohsen, I know you had some stories from Hajj, because obviously you've done Hajj, and I haven't yet.
So I mean, this verse, the subject of this tafsir is always brings back memories of Hajj for me naturally, So I went on Hajj in 2014, so 5 years ago now. And the probably one of the most vivid memories that I've got of Hajj is so for any of you who have been to Hajj, you'll know that the British tents in Mina are very, very far in. They're basically, they might as well be in Muzdalifah, they're that far. So that means a lot of walking. So after you've done the kind of pelting of the pillars, then you kind of, you can freshen up, and then you make your way back to your tent, and it's a long, long way back. So my wife and I one night decided that we were going to make the journey back, and it's a long story short. It was my wife's fault that we ended up getting lost, and we got lost for 6 hours, and it took us 6 hours to get back to our tent. And bearing in mind, we were in ihram. It was middle of the night. We were already tired. All the rest of it, and you are very much having to do everything to restrain yourself because you're in ihram. And the thing that kept coming back to me was this verse, because there are three key things that Allah explicitly discourages or forbids in this verse, and one of them is quarreling. And it's so easy in Hajj to quarrel because there are so many things that go wrong, and there are so many things about which you can quarrel. But this verse was the one that kept ticking in the back of my mind and stopped me from having it out and quarreling with my wife. And it's a good job actually in the end, because it turns out that at the time we didn't know that she was actually expecting, and so if it would have been a very, very harsh quarreling from me if that had been the case.
Alhamdulillah. That sounds like hard work. Oh, mashallah. So next section, before we conclude, is the insight of the verse. So the insight of the verse for me here was that this is a discussion about dunya, right? This is a discussion about what stuff to take with you on this journey of Hajj. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has taken this discussion about dunya and implanted, slap bang in the middle of it, a discussion about the akhirah. Because He said, وَتَزَوَّدُوا فَإِنَّ خَيْرَ الزَّادِ التَّقْوَى. But actually the best of provisions is taqwa. And وَاتَّقُونِ يَا أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. And fear me, or you who have reflection of wise people or wisdom. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's plonked the akhirah in the middle of this. And He does this in another place of the Quran as well, where He adopts the same kind of phraseology as well. He says, يَا بَنِي آدَمْ قَدْ أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ لِبَاسٍ يُوَارِي سَوْآتِكُمْ وَرِيشًا وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ ذَلِكَ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَذَكَّرُونَ. So, O children of Adam, we have certainly sent down for you garments to cover your nakedness and for adornment. And yet the garment of taqwa, that's the best. Such are the signs of Allah, so that they may take admonition. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, same thing that He's done in this verse as well, where this is a discussion about clothing, right? Very, very dunyawi kind of thing. But in the middle of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sent down this akhirah bit, and He says, وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. And the garment of taqwa, that's the best. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is constantly taking us back from the dunya to the akhirah and making us realize that this is a means to an end. Inna lillahi, there's a poem by Imam Shafi'i, Inna lillahi ibadun futana طلقوا الدنيا وخافوا الفتنة نظروا فيها فلما عرفوا إنها ليست لحي وطنا جعلوها لجة واتخذوا صالح الأعمال فيها سفنا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has some very clever servants. إن لله عباد فتنة طلقوا الدنيا, they divorce the dunya and they fear the fitan. نظروا فيها فلما عرفوا, when they look into this world, they see that this is not the resting place or the final destination of the living. إنها ليست لحي وطنا جعلوها لجة واتخذوا, they make it a sea, an ocean. They make this life an ocean. وَاتَّخَذُوا صَالِحَ الْأَعْمَالِ فِيهَا سُفُنًا. And they make the good deeds that they have a ship that will traverse this ocean of life and gets them to the thing that actually really is everlasting. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is kind of getting at the same, He is saying the same thing here, which is make this world, the dunyawi aspects of this world, something much more meaningful and transcendent and getting towards the akhirah. So, action points. So I've got a couple, Mohsin, and feel free to chuck in any if you have any. So the first thing I think is, just building on from that last point, think about just a mundane thing that you do every day, and it could be your, your morning ritual. It could be how you eat your food in the evening. It could be your commute. It could be anything, right? How you drive, anything. And then think about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would want you to imbue that daily thing, that dunyawi thing, with taqwa and take it to the next level. So that's my first action point. And then the second one is that Rasulullah, he said, أكثروا في الذكر حادم اللذات. Remember often the destroyer of pleasures. Remember often the death, which is going to be the destroyer of pleasures. And when we do that, when we remember death, we are instantly increasing our taqwa. We are instantly increasing our willpower. We are instantly increasing our resistance to sinning. Because if we vividly remember death, then we know that these short-term things are suddenly much less important, and we have real willpower to be able to resist that. So any thoughts from you on that front, Mohsin? Any action points for our listeners?
So agreed with those. The other one I would say is just taking this verse or these verses in the round and how they relate to Hajj itself. And obviously we're not too far from Hajj, and maybe we should be, as an audience, obviously we've got Ramadan around the corner, but we should also be thinking about Hajj and increasing our good deeds in those days of Dhul Hijjah. And also for those of the audience, and I'm saying this because I know people who, they've been wanting to go to Hajj for years, but they can't quite do this. And assuming that that is the case within the audience, whether that's a financial reason or whether it's a more practical reason that you can't go to Hajj, maybe think about things that you can do just to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the absence of going to Hajj, even if that's something straightforward like refreshing your mind on the fiqh of some key Hajj aspects like ihram. And the fiqh of Hajj is actually really interesting because it's something usually that people only do once in their lifetime. So you've got this flurry of learning beforehand, and if you're anything like me, you'll pretty much forget it afterwards. But wouldn't it be nice if we actually learnt Allah's deen for the sake of learning Allah's deen, rather than just doing it for the actual journey and just doing it for, His pleasure? Wouldn't that be something quite nice?
No, I agree. Jazakallah khair. So, so there you have it, folks. 3 to-do points for you. And, Jazakallah khair once again for tuning in. And inshallah, this tafsir is a every 2-week type of thing. So inshallah, we'll be back with you in a couple of weeks on the tafsir. But in the interim, there's a whole load of other content that we'll be churning out your way. And, if you have benefited from this, then please do support our channel and make it possible for us to keep on producing this kind of content by subscribing and leaving a review on whatever podcast platform that you're on. That's super helpful for us, and it helps us reach to a wider audience as well. Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.